Imagine this. You are a German soldier during World War II. It is the middle of the night. You are exhausted. Your boots are muddy, your blanket is terrible, and your only dream is to sleep for 5 peaceful minutes. Then you hear something in the sky. Not a roaring engine, not a giant bomber, just a soft, creepy little sound. Whoosh. Like someone is sweeping the sky with a broom. You look up. Nothing. Then suddenly, boom! Congratulations, you have just been visited by the Night Witches. And no, this is not a fantasy movie. These were real Soviet women who flew tiny wooden planes at night and terrified German troops so badly that the Germans gave them one of the coolest nicknames in military history, the Night Witches. Welcome back to the channel, where history is never boring. And sometimes it arrives at 2 a.m. in a wooden plane with bombs attached. Today, we are talking about the Night Witches, an all-female Soviet bomber regiment from World War II. They were young, they were underestimated. Their planes looked like flying school projects. And somehow, they became one of the most feared night bombing units on the Eastern Front. If you like strange, powerful, and underrated stories from history, make sure to follow the channel. Because history is not just kings, generals, and boring dates. Sometimes it is young women in oversized boots making an entire army afraid of the dark. Now, let us meet the Night Witches. The Night Witches were officially known as the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. Later, they became the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. Very official, very serious, very difficult to fit on a t-shirt. But their nickname, the Night Witches, is the one everyone remembers. This regiment was part of the Soviet Air Forces during World War II, and what made it extraordinary was simple. It was made up entirely of women. Pilots, navigators, mechanics, ground crew, commanders, everyone. At a time when many people believed women did not belong in combat, these women looked at that opinion and basically said, "That is cute." Anyway, where are the planes? They flew night bombing missions against German forces using old Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes. These aircraft were slow, outdated, and made mostly of wood and canvas. Yes, wood and canvas. Imagine being one of the most powerful armies in Europe and getting bombed by what looks like a flying picnic basket with wings. The story begins in 1941, when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa. The invasion was massive and brutal. Cities were destroyed. Families were separated. Millions of people were pulled into the war. Many Soviet women did not want to simply wait in the background. They wanted to fight. They wanted to defend their homes. They wanted to do more than watch history happen to them. One of the most important figures in this story was Marina Raskova, a famous Soviet aviator. Think of her as the person who looked at the situation and said, "Fine, if nobody is building the team, I will build it myself." Raskova was already a national hero, and many young women wrote to her asking for a chance to serve as pilots. Their message was simple: "We can fly. We are ready. And please stop pretending courage is a men-only subscription service." Marina Raskova convinced Soviet leadership to create female aviation units. As a result, several women's air regiments were formed, including the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. The women who joined were often very young. Some were teenagers. Many were in their early 20s. At the age when many people today are still figuring out their college major, these women were learning how to fly bombing missions at night, in freezing weather, while people shot at them from the ground. So, yes, slightly more stressful than final exams. Training was intense. They had to learn flying, navigation, bombing, emergency procedures, aircraft maintenance, and military discipline. And they had to learn fast. The war was not waiting politely outside with a clipboard. Now, let us talk about their aircraft, because this is where the story becomes both hilarious and unbelievable. The Night Witches flew the Polikarpov Po-2, a small biplane designed in the 1920s. By World War II standards, this thing was ancient. It was slow, it was fragile, it had an open cockpit, It had no radar, no advanced navigation system, and no serious defensive weapons. It was made of wood and canvas, which sounds less like a warplane and more like something your uncle built in a garage after watching one documentary. The PO-2 was originally used for training and agricultural work, including crop dusting. So yes, the Night Witches were basically flying into war with a plane that had a previous career spraying fields. And somehow they made it terrifying. Here is the twist. The PO-2 was terrible in many ways, but it also had strange advantages. First, it was very slow. Normally, being slow in combat is bad, very bad, like bringing a spoon to a sword fight bad. But German fighter planes were much faster, sometimes too fast. The PO-2 could fly so slowly and so low that German pilots had trouble targeting it properly without overshooting. Second, the PO-2 was small and light. It could take off and land from rough fields instead of needing fancy air bases. Third, the engine was relatively quiet, and that quiet engine became part of the Night Witches' most famous trick. When they approached a target, they would reduce power or cut the engine and glide silently toward the German position. The only sound was the wind moving through the wires and canvas. To German soldiers below, it sounded like a broom sweeping through the night sky. That is why they called them witches. The Night Witches usually flew in small groups. One plane might distract the enemy searchlights, another would approach quietly. Then, just when the soldiers below thought maybe they were safe, the bombs would drop. The crews flew low. They flew in darkness. They used silence as a weapon. Remember, they had no GPS, no night vision, and no modern communication systems. Today, some of us cannot find a restaurant without a phone saying, "Turn left in 200 meters." These women were navigating through active war zones in the dark, using maps, compasses, math, memory, and nerves of steel. The pilot had to keep the aircraft steady. The navigator had to find the target, calculate the route, and release the bombs at the right moment. There was no room for panic. There was no room for, "Oops!" And there was definitely no room for, "Can we circle back? I think we missed the exit." The Night Witches were not always destroying huge targets with massive bombs. Their aircraft were too small for that. But their real power was psychological. They attacked at night, again and again. They disrupted sleep. They created fear. They made German soldiers feel unsafe even when the front seemed quiet. Imagine trying to sleep when you know that at any moment a silent wooden plane might glide above you and drop explosives. That is not a healthy bedtime routine. German troops reportedly hated them, and the German command took them seriously. The enemy was so annoyed, scared, and frustrated by these young women in outdated planes that they became a true legend of the Eastern Front. That is how you know you are doing your job extremely well. Life in the regiment was difficult, and sometimes almost absurd. At first, many of the women were given uniforms made for men. The boots were too big, the jackets did not fit, some had to stuff their boots just to walk properly. Imagine preparing for a bombing mission, and your first enemy is not the Luftwaffe, but oversized footwear. They also faced sexism from some male soldiers and officers. Many people doubted them, some laughed at them, some believed they would fail. But the Night Witches did not waste too much time arguing. They just flew, and flew, and flew. Eventually, their results became impossible to ignore. There is something very satisfying about people underestimating you, and then you casually become one of the most feared units in the sky. That is not just revenge. That is professional revenge. We also need to talk about the mechanics and ground crew, because they were essential. The planes came back full of bullet holes. Engines needed repairs. Bomb racks needed reloading. Fuel had to be handled quickly. The ground crew often worked in freezing cold, mud, darkness, and danger. If a plane came back damaged, they had to fix it fast so it could go back out the same night. Because the PO-2 was made of wood and canvas, repairs could sometimes be done with simple materials, but that did not make the job easy. It meant the aircraft were constantly being patched up like flying jackets with engines attached. The pilots became famous, but the mechanics kept the whole operation alive. Without them, there were no missions, no takeoffs, no night witches, just cold fields and broken planes. It is easy to joke about the wooden planes, but the danger was very real. The PO-2 had almost no protection. If hit by enemy fire, it could catch fire or fall apart. The pilots flew low and slow, which helped them avoid some fighters, but made them vulnerable to anti-aircraft guns. They often flew in terrible weather: rain, fog, snow, freezing wind. The cockpit was open, so they were exposed to the cold. During winter missions, their hands could go numb. Their faces could freeze. They still had to fly, navigate, and bomb accurately. And because they often flew multiple missions per night, exhaustion was constant. This was not a glamorous movie scene. No cool sunglasses, no dramatic slow-motion runway walk, just frostbite, fear, and a wooden aircraft making suspicious noises. Many members of the regiment died during the war. More than 30 women from the unit were killed in combat or accidents. So while their story is inspiring, it is also tragic. These were real young women risking everything, night after night. Over the course of the war, the Night Witches flew more than 23,000 sorties. That number is wild. 23,000 missions. They dropped thousands of bombs on German positions, supply depots, bridges, railways, and military targets. Many of them received high honors. Several were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, one of the highest honors in the country. One famous pilot, Nadezhda Popova, flew hundreds of missions and survived incredible danger. Another key figure, Yevdokia Bershanskaya, commanded the regiment and helped shape it into an elite unit. Under Bershanskaya's leadership, the regiment became one of the most respected aviation units of the war. Not respected for women, respected, period. Important difference. The Night Witches matter because they challenge the usual image of war heroes. When people imagine World War II pilots, they often picture men in fast fighter planes roaring through the sky in dramatic dogfights. But the Night Witches show another kind of courage. The courage to fly outdated aircraft into danger. The courage to keep going while exhausted. The courage to do a job even when people doubt you. The courage to use creativity when you do not have the best equipment. They turned weakness into strategy. Their planes were slow, so they used silence. Their bomb loads were small, so they attacked repeatedly. They lacked advanced technology, so they relied on skill. They were underestimated, so they became unforgettable. Most people prove haters wrong by getting a promotion or starting a business. The Night Witches did it by bombing Nazis from wooden planes at night. Different level. Picture this: a dark field near the front line. Young women in oversized uniforms stand beside fragile little biplanes. The air is cold. The engines are ready. Somewhere, far away, artillery flashes in the night. They know the mission is dangerous. They know not everyone always comes back. But they climb into the cockpit anyway. The engine starts. The plane rolls forward. The wheels leave the ground. Soon, the aircraft disappears into the darkness. Below, German soldiers hear a faint sound in the sky. Not a roar, not a scream, just a whisper. Then the bombs fall, and another legend is born.